Hello everyone. This is kind of an unusual video for my channel. Normally we just do the kind of play along, the occasional tutorial video. This kind of falls into the latter, just because I apparently kicked a hornet's nest when I was asking questions on both the BX Facebook group and the OSE Facebook group about movement. And how movement was defined in BX. Because kind of the last game, if you watched it, with the big battle versus the 50-some-odd orcs, there were some questions on movement. We were kind of, how is movement supposed to play out? With how are declarations of action supposed to play out? And things like that. I don't have a problem with changing rules, as you see in my game. Like, I have a bunch of house rules, so I don't have a problem with it. The thing is, I like to understand what is the actual rule, what is the rule as written, to then be able to then go, okay, I'm going to change that because of this and this. Because there might be a reason that something is the way it is, and it might affect other things. It's something I learned really from playing a lot of indie games and story games, is generally, like, it's okay to modify something, but you should probably play it rules as written to begin with, then modify it, because you'll have an idea of it. The author might have intended something and for it to work a certain way, and then by messing with it, you're messing with all sorts of mechanics. So what you see before you was really the picture that started it all. And the simple question that I asked was, can the Blue Orc move one space up and attack the magic user, Vance, if you're paying attention to my channel? So can he move up one space and attack him? And I wanted rules as written. I didn't want some sort of, this is how I do it in my game. And I love that you want to tell me how you do it in your game. But I want to know how it is, so then I can make a judgment for my game. And the first thing I got was old school essentials / BX is never designed to play on a grid. You can't play it on a grid. There's no such thing as movement rules. Well, that's not exactly correct. So it's never supposed to be made into a grid. It's never supposed to be, anything like that. Well, let's take a look. Now, I'm looking at the BX rules, not Old School Essentials, but these are what they're based on. But I want to go back to kind of like the more primary source document. And there are movement rules. Here's Encounter. We're going to come back to these. Defensive movement rules, fighting withdrawals, retreats. So there's definitely movement rules. That's a thing. And I believe it's on B24. Oh, went way too far. On B24 is the statement here, where they're doing kind of GM advice. This is kind of like their GM section of the book. 24. Oh, 24 is where I was at before. I have to find the GM advice section where they're talking about where Tom Mulvey, because I had people come in telling me I played in Tom Mulvey's game and this is how he did it. And I understand that might be how he did it, but I'm also going off of what's written here. So that's just me. It's at the very end, because I think it's towards the end of the book. Yep, right at the end. So, B61. DM instructions. A whole section on miniature figures, and a whole section on playing surfaces, which they recommend graph paper, which is a grid. And they also recommend blowing the graph paper up, putting a plexiglass top on top of it, and then you can use grease pens to draw on it to make the rooms and make the characters have their figures and everything like that move around. If that doesn't sound like a battle mat, I don't know what does. And people are like, oh, well, it's in the back. Well, it's in DM instructions. It's literally telling you, like, this is the, I'm not saying that you have to do it this way, but it's definitely an option. So that's kind of my thing. Like saying that wasn't designed for it. Well, they definitely wanted it to be an option. I also just did some light research, and TSR started like official miniatures lines in 1977, which 4 or 5 years before this. So I don't know. I don't know why they would back official miniatures. It was a hobby of war gamers designed to for war gamers. Like they made a war game for war gamers. So I'm talking these guys were into miniatures and they were into tactical combat. Like you're not going to convince me otherwise. So that's kind of one of my things. So right there, I want to take that off the table and say like it's definitely reasonable to do this. So now the question was, can the orc go from here to attack the spellcaster? My interpretation of it, of the rules, and it seems to be, maybe 50% of the crowd, tends to be no, that they cannot. Tends to be. And like I said, the writing's a little fuzzy, so that's why it's a little weird. So if we go back to B24, which we were at before, we can take a look at those rules. And the big thing is, the second step is movement per round. Meleeed opponents may only move defensively. So the big question is, what is a meleeed opponent? And if you look, it talks about them being engaged. That's kind of the word they use. When they're engaged in melee. What qualifies that? So when we go back here, he's within his 5-foot range. And they talk about 5 foot is melee range. So the question is, does the cleric have to attack the blue orc in order to be considered in melee? Does he have to attack the red orc to be considered in melee? When is melee and when does engagement happen? If they started the round here, does that matter? Like, what ends up happening? If the orc attacked the cleric, if the blue orc attacked the cleric, but the cleric attacked the red orc, is he engaged with him in melee, or is he engaged in melee with the red orc? And he can move by. Because once you're engaged in melee, it's very clear what you can do. So once you are engaged, you can only use defensive movement. And there are 2 types of defensive movement. A fighting withdrawal, which means you back up slowly, or a full retreat, which means you're booking and you're still going backwards. And a lot of people were saying that facing doesn't exist. Facing does not exist in this game, so therefore backwards could mean the orc could theoretically go this way, and that's backwards. Because we don't know what facing is. Well, I think common sense says that you're engaged with a foe, you're facing your foe. Like you're facing that direction. Facing has to exist in some form in basic, because they specifically talk about if you attack in the rear, that you get a +2 to hit and they can't use their shield. So if there was no such thing as facing, that rule wouldn't exist. That rule would just not need to be here, because no facing exists. Also, rogues or thieves do backstab, and they have to attack you in the back. So if there was no facing, there would be no way for them to do that. So the only logical thing we can assume is that facing is you're going to be facing your opponents, your shields are going to be going that direction. That's to me. So this orc, if he is engaged with the cleric, the only choices he has are to do a tactical retreat, or fighting withdrawal, a fighting withdrawal, which allows him to go backwards half his encounter rate. So orcs are 40, so they could go back 20 feet. 1, 2, 3, 4. So he could do that, or and the cleric wouldn't get an attack on him, or he can run, like full out retreat, in which he would go twice his encounter rate. So he would go 80. He could go up to 80. And the cleric would get an attack at +2, and he would have no shield bonus. So that seems to be the only two rules that are kind of set on that form of movement. So it was a little divisive, and then I sent a second picture which said, how about this? So if it started the turn like this, could the Blue Orc move up? The consensus seems to be yes at this point, because he has no enemies around him. He no longer has to use defensive movement, he uses encounter movement at that point. And we have encounter movement, it's defined up here what your encounter movement is, and what you would have. So orcs have 40 feet of encounter movement. And he could then move up to there or wherever within his range, because he had not yet been engaged in melee. But that tends to be the thing. When does a person get engaged in melee? And that's the thing that we were talking about a lot and debating. Because I think there's an argument to be made that as soon as he moves to here, this cleric isn't going to just do nothing, and the cleric isn't pressed up against this wall. This is only a 10-foot hallway. So if the cleric's in the middle of that space, he's 2.5 feet in. Like if he's centered there, his arm probably sticks out 2 feet, 2.5 feet. If he's a big guy. So he's covering that entire distance, that whole 5-foot square in essence. But if he has a weapon, and let's pretend it's a fighter, not a cleric even, swords are a good 4 feet long. I'm talking, you extend that out there, if that orc's trying to get by, there's an argument to be made, like, he's not going to want to take that chance because he doesn't want to get killed. And that once you're within 5 feet, you're considered engaged. I found someone, I don't remember who, sent me this website that is the interpretations of basic combat. So, and it is interpretations, but they do cite a lot of their sources. They use Holmes, BX, and they use Menser, basically BX, and then the Rules Cyclopedia. That's kind of a thing. And they define melee as anyone within your 5 feet range. As soon as you're within 5 feet, you're considered engaged in melee. Not that you attack someone or not attack someone. They talk about this spider drops out of the sky, boom, both of them are engaged. The spider can attack the fighter, but that still means the wizard is engaged. He's still within 5 feet. So this seems to be a lot of interpretation because they only cite B26 here. They don't cite anything else really. But, it's reasonable. I think it's a reasonable thing, and it's also easy. The problem I have with the whole engagement rule and the idea of they have to do a swing on someone, if the orc was here and the cleric attacked red but didn't attack blue, then I have to start tracking who attacked who. And that doesn't seem to be very basic to me. That seems to be very fiddly, that I have to keep track of it. So keeping it simple and just saying you have this kind of, and I know people hate this term, this kind of zone of control around your character seems to be an easier proposition. It seems to be an easier way to do it. That tends to be the case. The other thing is, I was talking with my players about it, and I'm like, how do we want to handle this? And one of my more vocal players, who's really more into rules, the other guys aren't so much into them. He's a big fan of attacks of opportunity like we were using in the beginning. And I'm probably going to go back to that. The only thing I don't like about this, but then again, once again, you have to consider, how the game was designed and why it was designed this way. I like attacks of opportunity because then the orc can weigh his options. He can start moving through there and trying to plow in to take the mage out, but he's going to take a sword swing. And is that worth it? So it gives you options. It gives you tactical options in combat. I don't like barring things from moving, but if it wants to take a chance, that sounds good. But let's just pretend that, let's take these guys out of here. Boom. And we can pull up some other monsters. let's put a big black dragon here, and that black dragon's going to do something, come down here and eat that mage. Theoretically, you could have a fighter or cleric or whoever go up here. Let's pretend the room's a little bigger too. I could move them over into a bigger room. Let's to give it the example a little more clarity. So the black dragon, let's say it's out of can't shoot breasts anymore or anything, and it wants to go over there and kill the mage. The fighter is locking that dragon down. So the dragon can only make retreat movement at this point, in theory. And I know it doesn't make 100% sense, but it is part of a tactic that the fighters or whoever, the tough guys, can lock down an opponent so they can't get at your squishier people. And the whole thing is that how it was designed? Like, was that the design part of it? Like, is that how it was wanted? So that's kind of my question. And that's kind of why I asked. And like I said, I did not think I would get the response that I got, which was a lot of people. Actually, it seemed like they were getting angry over it. Like, angry that I would dare even ask a question about movement. And a lot of people are just like, yeah, you can move by. And I'm like, but have you actually looked at the rules, though? That's kind of been my thing. So, let me know. I guess you could drop your opinion in the the place below if you wanted to have an idea on movement. Like I said, this is kind of what I would call my interpretation of this, of how the rules as written work for movement. They seem to be close to the book or seem to be close to intentions. But then again, like I said, it's a lot of fuzzy words, like engaged. But they never define what engaged means. So, that's pretty much it. I hope you liked the little short video, and if you did, tell me, and I might make more of these, and we'll go from there. All right, talk to you later.